Look, I helped plan and implement a war against Iraq, Operation Desert Storm. We initiated it with a strategic air campaign. We took everything out. No electricity in Baghdad, no electricity in Iraq. We blew up everything. That's how you do it. We blew up the bridges. We blew up the roads. We blew up the trains. We blew up the political decision-making centers. If we thought you were in a bunker, we blew up the bunker. We blew everything up, everything. We did that for 6 weeks. Then when we started to roll in, it took us 100 hours to get the Iraqis to surrender. 100 hours. They were the fourth largest army at the time, coming off of an 8-year war with Iran where they were victorious. So this wasn't a pushover. This wasn't 2003 against a defeated army that never had a chance to rebuild. We took on the fourth largest army in the world, and we hit them with a strategic air campaign that so weakened them that when our military rolled across the border, not only did we kill 100,000 of them that quick, we could have killed 30, 40,000 more had we just kept the war going on for 24 hours. It was annihilation, because that's what happens when a superior military force with superior military doctrine and superior military technology goes up against another army like that. It's a one-sided fight. Russia tied its hands behind its back. When Russia decides that it will no longer self-limit, what you're going to see happen to Ukraine is what happened to Iraq. It will be one-sided. It will be devastating. It will be total. You're not going to get Zelensky having a temper tantrum before the various elected bodies of the world, where he has internet access and is able to broadcast his image into the United States Congress, the British Parliament, the European Parliament. Those days are done. The idea of Zelensky feeling free enough to meet with foreign officials, no. No trains will be running into Ukraine. No trucks will be running. Ask a Jordanian truck driver what it was like trying to run the gauntlet from the Jordanian border to Baghdad. Not too many of them made it because we had aircraft flying over, bombing them all the time. No trucks will make it. No trains will make it. Bridges will drop. Roads will be bombed, pocketed. It's going to be a completely different reality. Russia made a decision going in that they were going to preserve as much civilian infrastructure as possible and bend over backwards to preserve civilian life. It doesn't mean that Russia wants to commit a war crime, but in a war, all the military has to do when looking at something is decide, is it a protected site, a hospital, a religious thing, schools, things of that nature, or does it have a military aspect to it? And a hospital can become militarized if they put anti-aircraft guns on it. Then the question is there a military necessity to strike the site? And if the answer is yes, the only other thing you have to ask is the damage that we will do proportional to the interest we have in striking it? Meaning, if I'm going to hit one anti-aircraft gun, is it worth killing 1,000 civilians? And most people would say that's disproportional, therefore we don't strike. But only Russia gets to make that call. International law simply says you have to ask the question, what is the military necessity? What is the issue of proportionality? If Russia determines that there's military necessity, regardless of the proportionality, then it's going to be bombed, and that's just the way it is. So far, Russia has basically said that any civilian casualties eliminate necessity, so that Russia, instead of preemptively bombing the target, has been sending troops in to do the unheard of, things that in the United States we would never do. We would never send troops into harm's way to remove civilians from a basement when the enemy was dug in on the top. We would just drop the building and call the civilians collateral casualties. The Russians have been sacrificing their own blood and flesh to save civilians from that. The Russians have been the most honorable warriors in modern history imaginable.
I wouldn't go that far. I mean, we don't know what happened there. And unfortunately, I have to push back a little bit on that. And coming back, to my initial question, why do we have to witness this? I mean, don't they have secret services? Apparently, the Russians were able to put a president in the United States, but they were not able to put a president in Kiev. I mean, why? And
well, first
why
of all, Russia didn't.
this?
Now I'm going to push back. I'm going to make the statement again. You can push back all you want. The Russians have been the most honorable military force in modern history. I challenge you to come up with a fact that contradicts me. I challenge you. If you can't, then you can say, I disagree with you, Scott. Be careful about pushing back, because I've
Yes, I
studied the
disagree
issue.
because there's nothing honorable about war in
Oh,
general.
you're talking to a Marine who is trained to fight war honorably. I'm trained to fight war in accordance with the rule of law. I don't make the decision to go to war. My political authorities do, and when they grant me the legal authority to wage conflict, I will wage it as ruthlessly as necessary to destroy the enemy with as minimal harm to civilians. And once an enemy raises their hand and surrenders, I take them prisoner, I treat their wounds, I feed them, and I don't torture them, unlike the Ukrainians. All right, so I'm going to sit here and push back. It's not that I'm pro-Russian, but I'm a military professional who's been to war. I'm watching what the Russians are doing. I'm saying, hats off to you guys. Good job. Now you say, is there another option other than war? There should always be an option other than war. You're talking to an intelligence professional. Okay, I know what it's like to do regime change. I know what you do. First of all, Russia isn't in the business of regime change, not like the United States, where we do it all the time.
So you say they lack the experience, or
no, I'm saying they lacked the political instruction. If Russia wanted to, we know they can. We saw what the Soviets did in Afghanistan, or in 1979, Kabul, regime change. All right, Spetsnaz went in, took out the leadership, replaced them with somebody they wanted. But that's not this Russia. This Russia doesn't do regime change. This Russia sought and bent over backwards to work within the framework of international law and policies that the United States, Germany, and France, remember the Normandy group, supposed to have a discussion? Russia bought into that. Don't criticize Russia for actually trying to accomplish the job diplomatically. Russia did everything it was supposed to do. It was France, Germany, and the United States that lied. They used the Normandy format while NATO trained Ukrainian forces, 1 battalion every 55 days, 7 days straight, build a military capable of launching an unprovoked war into the Donbass. That was NATO. Russia said, let's give peace a chance. Let's try and find a negotiated solution. Now, when the decision was made that they had to transfer this, look, there's every reason to believe that the Russian 5th Directorate of the FSB, which is responsible for these areas, did their best to recruit people. I'm not saying the Russians are asleep at the wheel. Intelligence is about collecting information, not just covert action. All right, so there's no doubt in my mind that the Russians had placed people inside the Ukrainian government and that they had sought to say, hey, look, we're coming in. What we need you to do is we need the military to stand down. We need the civilian areas to let us in because we have to demilitarize. We have to get rid of these Nazis. We have to get rid of the Azov Regiment. We have to get rid of Right Sector, Sloboda, all these parties that have targeted Russians for genocidal type treatment. We have to get rid of them. And I believe that the Russian leadership thought that they had an intelligence success. I believe when they first went in and told their guys, just keep driving, don't worry about your flanks, don't worry about the rear, go as far as you can to make a statement so that the Ukrainian government collapses, that they were told this was going to happen by their intelligence service. They failed. You know what's wrong with relying on intelligence? It ain't perfect. It fails. Sometimes they get it wrong. And when they get it wrong dramatically. And that happened to the Russians. I believe the Russians thought they were going to have an easier shot at taking down the Kiev government by intimidating them. They were told by people, and we saw, look at South, look at how quickly Kherson fell. Clearly, the Russian intelligence services did their job in Kherson. Clearly, the Ukrainians took off the mines off the road. They allowed the Russian forces in without resistance. So they got it right in Kherson. They didn't get it right in Kharkiv. They didn't get it right in Kiev. And then the Russians had to transition to the next phase of the conflict, which was we're going to go straight military conflict. But, you know, it's not as easy. Regime change, if it was easy, we would have gotten rid of Saddam Hussein a long time ago. We tried a lot to get rid of Saddam Hussein. CIA, pretty good at the intelligence business. But it didn't work. We failed every time we tried because as much as we want to get rid of a regime, the regime wants to survive. And the regime has security apparatuses that counter this and all that stuff. The intelligence game is an ugly game. It ain't pretty. And I wouldn't rely on it for anything other than gathering information. The second you have to use that kind of subterfuge to achieve a political objective, it means that you sort of suck as a nation because you're trying to do something that shouldn't be done. Russia tried to give diplomacy a chance, and Russia should be given recognition. You can't sit here and snap your finger and say, oh, get rid of Zelensky. That's not how the law works. That's not how the world works. That's how novels work. That's how movies work. But it's not reality. The reality is Russia tried its best to achieve a nonviolent, peaceful resolution to this problem. And when it failed, not because of Russia's efforts, but because of France, Germany, Ukraine, the United States, and NATO, then Russia had no choice but to go to the special military operation. And even then, Russia made a decision going to go in soft because of the Russian nation. Why do you want to inflict harm on the Russian nation? Why do you want to inflict harm on Ukraine? There's a shared history here. They had a problem with the Zelensky government. They had a problem with right sector. They had a problem with Azov. They didn't have a problem with the Ukrainian people. But now NATO has made it a different ballgame altogether because this is a NATO army, not a Ukrainian army.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah, and yeah, I guess like regardless of what we think